Okay. All right, so very, very happy to have Aidan here with us. Rankin, yes, who's got a new book on Shinto, on Shintoism, and we've just featured an article of his in our new magazine, which is the Mind, Body, Spirit Watkins Review, which is a new format of the Watkins Review. And there's a beautiful article here on his book, and anybody who buys his book today will get the magazine for free. So you're very much encouraged to do so. And yeah, without any further ado, we'll let Aidan take it away and talk about his new book. Cool.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to talk briefly, and then I'm going to take a few questions and sign copies of my book if you want. The crucial thing, I suppose, is why Shinto? Why is it relevant at this moment? Many of you will remember the tsunami and the earthquake and tsunami in Japan earlier this year, and the Fukushima disaster. And what does that tell us, and what is it telling a growing number of people in Japan? One of the things it has reminded us about is just how fragile we are as human beings. We're not above or beyond nature. We're not somehow outside it. We're not always, as we like to say in the West, the measure of all things. We have to learn how to live within limits, learn how to live as if nature mattered. And Shinto, as the indigenous spiritual tradition of Japan, very much reminds people about this. It keeps them rooted in nature. There's a lot of interest in the West and many other parts of the world in what are referred to as indigenous spiritual traditions or pathways. And Shinto has a lot in common with those of, for example, the Native Americans or the Aboriginal Australians, the First Peoples. It traces its origins to about 14,000 BCE, that period. And yet, unlike other indigenous paths, it's an unbroken thread. It hasn't been violently suppressed or interrupted like those traditions. It's continuous. It has a history of interaction, or creative interaction with Buddhism, but that has been more of a symbiotic relationship. In a sense, you could say that Buddhism in Japanese culture represents the rational and intellectual side, whereas Shinto represents the purely intuitive. And one of the important things about Shinto is that it doesn't have a dogma as such. It doesn't. There isn't really such a thing as Shinto fundamentalism. It doesn't have a set of precepts that you have to follow, otherwise you'll be punished. It doesn't have a concept of sin. Instead, it starts with the idea that nature. And they call it great nature. It's very much revered in Shinto. Nature is essentially benign, and humanity, each one of us, is essentially benign as long as we go with the flow of nature, as long as we don't assume that we're somehow outside or excluded from the rest of the natural process. But at the same time as that, Shinto doesn't reject technology or urban society. It's very much rooted in that. A Shinto practitioner I worked with in Amsterdam used the phrase, nature is the city. There's a continuum between urban men and women and our rural ancestors and our hunter-gatherer ancestors before that. I mentioned the word ancestor, and that's very frequently associated with this type of spirituality. It is said that Shinto is ancestor worship. It isn't exactly that. It isn't worship in the dogmatic sense, but it is revering the past as well as the present and the future. It's seeing life as a continuum in which all those elements matter. The past influences the present influences the future. Each one of our actions is important because it can have a subtle influence beyond what we immediately understand. I believe that some Native Americans have a similar principle, and I mention it in my book, called the seventh generation principle, and that is the idea of not making a decision without thinking about the ramifications for future generations, 7 generations from now. And some campaigners in the United States were even calling for a 7th generation amendment to the Constitution. Now that's a long way off, but it's a fascinating idea, and it's very much in tune with this type of spirituality. So Shinto is the Japanese expression of a universal spiritual truth, but it has relevance outside Japan because it communicates directly with technological society. It's not saying that we need to throw everything off. We need to abandon what we know and understand about technology, merely that we should learn to use it wisely. For example, not to site nuclear plants in ecologically and seismically very vulnerable areas. I mean, that's a lesson that can be learnt, and it's something that is being talked about in Japan. And I mention in my article in Watkins' Review something that has emerged very much since I began research on this book, and that is the economic downturn in Japan, and its relegation to third economic power below the United States and China. Now, many people are rediscovering their spiritual heritage as a result of that. This might seem surprising in the West, where New Age spirituality is very much associated with the consumer society. In Japan, it appears to be associated with a retreat from consumption. In other words, people are beginning to realize that economic growth is not the only purpose of life, and younger writers are publishing books with titles like The Younger Generation That Doesn't Want Much, and that's a very radical idea for post-war generations used to the idea of abundance and to pursuing wealth whatever the environmental cost. So that's an interesting development, and again it has quite a lot to do with the Shinto cultural heritage. A very important idea in Shinto is Musubi, which is organic growth, and an analogy often given is with moss growing on a rock. It grows organically, it develops every it is a collective whole, but each individual strand is important as well. The individual actually increases their individuality and realizes their individuality by realizing that they're part of a continuum, that they connect with other human beings and with everything else within nature. So that principle is very important to Shinto, as is the principle, I referred to it slightly earlier, of going with the flow of nature, of looking for patterns in nature and working with them, working with the grain, rather than developing a kind of fortress-like attitude to nature, where it's something out there that we must defend ourselves against. The word itself, Shinto, means it's a Chinese translation of the way, that's the to part, like Tao or Dao. The way of Kami, and Shin is a transliteration of Kami. Kami means deities or nature spirits, elemental forces, archetypes. You can either believe in them literally or view them as metaphors. And I say them, but there is also a unity. You could say that each kami is an aspect of a larger divine power. So anyway, Shinto literally means the way of Kami, but a more subtle translation is the way according to Kami. That means sort of fitting in with, working out and fitting in with the divine energy which is reflected in nature. I mean, again, it's not something above or below or outside. It doesn't involve rejecting the physical world or rejecting the body. I mean, there are no hang-ups or prohibitions about in the area of sexuality or sexual orientation, which some other faith traditions have. Within Shinto, it's all are considered part of the life process, and this is really why I've called my book A Celebration of Life, because it is about Shinto as representing a life force, and about how those who come from other traditions can tune into it and use it. I mean, either as either incorporate it into their own spiritual practice or hold it up as a kind of critical mirror, especially those in the West who are interested in reconstructing pagan or pre-Christian traditions. They can look at something which is sort of a continuing indigenous pathway that has survived and evolved. And to me, that is the relevance of Shinto in the modern world. I think I've probably spoken enough. I'm very happy to take some questions now.
Doesn't it involve, I don't know that much, but doesn't it involve chanting? How do you practice?
It can involve chanting. It involves meditation and shrine worship, and shrines are often located in cities. They're often located by small lakes or rock formations. In rural areas, a mountain can be a mountain pathway, can be a shrine, a stream, even a tree or a small wood. All these things can count as areas for meditation, and the form of meditation is essentially to bring you into a sense of oneness with nature. More questions?
I'm still a bit doubtful how the understanding of Shinto or Shinto's look at nature really translates into a Western perspective. Would you say that what is required that Western traditions are looking at nature in a different way with the understanding of Shinto? So for me, it's still not clear how something so indigenous as Shinto really translates into a Western perspective, say.
Well, I see your point very much. I mean, at one level it is very much indigenous to Japan. At another, it represents an underlying spiritual truth that is found in all cultures. So there's a sense in which by studying it, by looking at it, one can increase an understanding of certain aspects of one's own culture. I mean, that's not a completely satisfactory answer, I know, but it's a beginning. I mean, you don't have to become Shinto, but you can use it to tune into certain things within your own culture, or if you're engaged in another type of spiritual practice, you can use it, as I said earlier, as a critical mirror. You can use it to measure your own success with that, and I mean, it's something that you can use it. You can use it as you want, essentially. Right. I mean, it's something that is flexible rather than rigid. Mm-hmm. So you can use it or not use it, benefit from it directly or indirectly. It's really in your hands what you do with it in that sense.
But how would I approach it if I wanted to go further? Say I want to know more about Shinto and Shinto practices. Are there Shinto practitioners in the West?
Yes, there is a Shinto shrine in Amsterdam, which organises classes in meditation, some physical exercise as well, mainly meditation and aspects of the history and tradition associated with Shinto. So that's one starting point,
Right.
and they have a website which is www.shinto.nl. That's quite a simple one to remember. I have been there myself on a number of occasions. They have Japanese ceremonies but adapted to Western audiences, so that is a possible starting point, certainly.
Good, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know anything about Shinto until I came here this evening. This past, present, future, but in the sort of here and now on this
Yes.
level. Ancestors and other lives, future. What are their thoughts, or is it purely on this level?
Well, the interesting thing about it is that it isn't all that concerned with the afterlife, like many faith traditions. It doesn't. There isn't a central sort of body of speculation on what happens after death, except that there is an idea of general continuity of life, and that can be something as simple as you have a tree, or a sort of flowering tree, growing above a grave or tomb, and that represents the continuation of the life force. So it's not necessarily linked to the continuity of individual life, but the continuity of life itself. Do you see what I mean? But you can, I mean, many people in Japan practice aspects of both Shinto and Buddhist spirituality, and from the Buddhism they take the idea of the cycle of samsara and reincarnation and transcending the self, but from Shinto they take the idea of appreciating life as it is. So there is the idea of continuity of life, future generations, present generation, past generations, but less about the direct reincarnation or afterlife of the individual soul.
Thank you.
I hope that's helped.
Yes, it has. Thank you.
You spoke about there not being any sin, but how about like sumi, like so the idea of pollution, and the kind of Shinto's kind of fixation on kind of getting rid of kind of the unclean.
Yes, well, that's not exactly. It's not exactly the same thing.
No, sure.
I see what you mean. This, there is something in common, but it's not based on a kind of moralistic condemnation. It's based on a sort of quest for cleanliness, and that's not associated with some of the things that we might associate it, with it in the West, or the Western religions associated with. So it's not so much about sexual sin, for example, but it can be applied to the environmental sphere and be about avoiding pollution, but but it is a nebulous concept, certainly.
I'm practicing a Japanese healing art which is called Jinshin Jutsu, and I'm wondering if Jiro Murai, who studied in the temple of Amaterasu, all the old scripts and so about Jinshin Jutsu, if this is based as well on this Jinshin Jutsu, Shinto.
Yes, it is. Yes, Amaterasu is the solar deity, the sun goddess, and very interesting. I mean, the sun is a feminine power associated with the life force or life spirit, because of course the sun is life-giving, is the origin of life, and that is very much recognized in Shinto. Now, and she is the kami or deity who is most often personified or sort of visualized in a kind of human form. She's also, as well as being the origin of life, she's an ancestral deity who is revered first, originally as the ancestor of the Japanese people, now as the ancestor of all of humanity. So that's so in a sense she exists on two levels: a solar deity who is the origin of life, and a kind of mythological ancestor. So yes, that is very closely linked with the Shinto tradition.